Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers, sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning to LL3-Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful realms of planet Earth. Today's date is Sunday, December 22nd, 2024. This is episode 1796. What is next for Syrians after Al-Assad ousted? Before I proceed, you can follow me on multiple social media sites and podcast channels. Just type in Looky Luck number 3, Looky Luck Roman number 3, which are 3 eyes, or the Looky Luck Roman number 3 podcast. Furthermore, if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, and all that good stuff, whatever you do, please use decorum. You can send it to me via email, ll3.podcast@proton.me. If you want to donate, go to paypal.me or cash.app/Looky-Luck number 3. Yeah, I had a busy week. Couldn't really do a show. I apologize for that. I make a living too. I know World Alternative Media has some controversies with their issues, I would say, with being bankrupt and all that. And it's horrible because Josh, I do like his content. Sometimes I go, what are you doing? You have to say it one way. But he is putting the word out to get people to think. So I always praise him. So folks out there, if you look up World Alternative Media, you can probably find him on Twitter too, or X, whatever you want to call it. And give him some love because, hey, he's speaking his mind. He has a right to free speech. And he does his homework. So he's not some person that just wants to be a beaker all day long. So I always admire him for that. Plus, when it comes to government, he's not love your devil like me. We don't worship these individuals as our lords and saviors or our masters. So I'm just very ashamed about what's going on with these folks when they're being not their sponsors or not pursuing the end in good faith. It happens a lot. So hopefully it will be resolved. And I was watching a little thing on Timcast. I think it was called Culture War. I didn't see the whole thing, but a little glimpse. I was like, I like to observe other websites. And there's one gentleman, got his name. He's a Compound Olive. He got called out by Tim from Timcast on the whole thing with January 6th. And the person, all he wants to do is wants to always go on one end of they should all be thrown in prison, this and that, and the folks out, and Tim just actually laid it all out. And it doesn't matter what you think about the J6 ordeal. I told people it was never an insurrection; it was an inside job done by design. And the ones who are starting most of the ruckus were hired guns. Even if you look at the Senate and congressional hearings, they were like, what's his name? Merrick Garland. Oh, I can't answer that because I would be in deep crap. These bunch of damn fools. All that power goes to their heads. They go, oh yeah, we can rule people now. Another chilling example of the war on terror, my friends, has always been against its people. So it was interesting. I had to do I'll be mainly narrating from AmericanFreePress.net, subscription only, before I talk about the pages I'm going to be reading about from the title aforementioned. This is one interesting here about pardon us, please. Time to rein in the power of the executive branch. This is what the American Free Press staff have to say about this. At the final days of 2024 tick away, President Joe Biden pardoned and commuted the sentences of over 1,500 people. While the Christian idea of mercy is laudable during Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's holidays, Biden brazens last-minute clemencies have even some Democrats saying he went too far and needs to be reined in. The whole process cries out for reform. Senator Amy Klobuchar Democrat from Minnesota, told CBS News in an interview on December 15th. Klobuchar was responded to criticisms directed at some of the names on Biden's nice list, including former doctor who watered down medications and used dirty needles on his cancer patients as part of a massive fraudulent Medicare billing scheme. Another individual who should never have made it on that list was Michael Conan. The former Pennsylvania judge was convicted of ethics violations in 2011 for accepting $3 million in bribes in return for funneling more than 2,000 children, some as young as 8, to 2 for-profit juvenile prisons in the state. Klobuchar was also critical of Biden pardoning his son Hunter, who had been convicted of 3 felonies and plead guilty to tax charges. Hunter was looking at 25 years in prison for his crimes, that until his father granted him a sweeping pardon for specified crimes that, oddly enough, went all the way back to 2014. No doubt about it. These are crimes for which you and I would have spent time behind bars. We should have some kind of an outside board that governors have, she told CBS News. Governors have the ability to give mercy to people after years have gone by, but a lot of them have boards that make recommendations and other things instead of people just doing it in the middle of the night. Everyone knows that Biden never pored over lengthy list of previously convicted criminals to compile a solid list of 1,500 people who deserve a pardon. That is a task he's simply incapable of doing these days. These names were assembled by unelected bureaucrats in the White House and then slipped in the front of the octogenarian president for his shaky John Hancock. In the spirit of giving this time of year, if Congress really want a present, a Christmas gift to their fellow countrymen, they will go even further than Klobuchar's call for oversight of presidential pardons and pass Kentucky Senator Rand Paul's regulation from the Executive Need of Scrutiny Act, which is RAINS. It is a long-needed reform to restrict the out-of-control power of the chief executive. Introduced in September, Paul's RAINS Act would effectively end the president's limitless power to enact endless rules and regulations with little to no congressional oversight. If passed, the legislation would require that any major rules estimated to have an economic impact on the country of $100 million or more would need to be affirmatively approved by Congress and signed by the president. As it is now, every year, tens of thousands of new rules and regulations drawn up by agencies under the executive branch take effect unless Congress specifically disapproves of them. Something that almost never happens in official Washington. Nameless, faceless, unelected bureaucrats in Washington have had to have too much power over the American people for far too long. Representative Kat Cammack, Republican from Florida, who introduced versions of Paul's bills into the House. The RAINS Act is a critical step toward reining in this unchecked power and restoring the lawmaking authority to Congress instead of the executive branch. Interesting with that, if you're going to make a rule, it's got to do a few things on Article 2 of the pardon. One, you have to be 2/3 majority of the House. So it's a constitutional perspective, okay? There can be a constitutional amendment on this. And 2, you got to be 2/3 of the Senate. And 3, 3/4 of the states in the Union have to approve it. That's the first step. Second, if you read the U.S. Constitution, the executive the federal government will only go after three crimes: treason, counterfeiting, and piracy. Can we say human trafficking is piracy? Yes. Whether it's child or adults, don't matter. That's considered piracy. All right, counterfeiting, same thing. Like what happened with that one judge, Conan, yeah, Michael Conanan. What he did, is that considered piracy? Yes. Hunter Biden on tax charges, okay, and of course the filing the 4473 under the Gun Control Act of 1968. There's a lot of questions on that. Is Hunter Biden a corporation? Yeah, it's possible based on his these schemes, but is he involved in piracy? I don't know. But the whole thing, what the one you always look at is, yeah, I'm convinced, yeah, he is dirty. Hunter is very dirty, and he's a pawn as well. I'm not too thrilled on some of these pardonings, but I say this: a lot of these federal laws that are considered unconstitutional needs to be repealed or jury nullification. You got to look at that angle. The RAIN Act has got to be in a constitutional amendment based on this view. And I'm not renouncing Rand Paul's idea and Kamek's, but the whole thing is it's very disturbing, because I know I did an episode on this about the whole unlimited preemptive pardons a while back, and of course the Supreme Court made a decision in 1864 it can be done. Look, when Gerald Ford did the same thing to Richard Nixon, he had never been they pardoned him, not because they were trying to impeach him, but trying to give him other things for what happened at Watergate. But he was a pawn too, as far as I'm concerned. But that's what areas you got to always examine. And if you want to read these articles, be a subscriber to AmericanFreePress.net. They are America's last real newspaper, populist, independent, not Republican or Democrat. So I admire that. And we'll just read right here. News you have missed. What's the view of daylight savings times? Well, in this post on his Truth social media site on December 13th, President-elect Donald Trump said he will try to end daylight savings time when he returns to office. The Republican Party will use its best efforts to eliminate daylight savings time, which has small but strong constituency. But shouldn't, he wrote. Daylight savings time is inconvenient and very costly to our nation. Setting clocks forward 1 hour in the spring and back in the fall is intended to maximize daylight during summer months, but has become unnecessary in the modern age. Daylight savings time was adopted as a wartime measure in 1942. The lawmakers have occasionally proposed getting rid of the real-time change altogether. The most prominent recent attempt was the bipartisan bill, the Sunshine Protection Act, that had proposed making daylight savings time permanent. It died in committee. The states can make this, and you can look at this angle too. The states can do the same thing. If I'm correct, Hawaii, Arizona, and certain areas of western part of Indiana don't even do it. Well, 10th Amendment, any commandeering doctrine, plain and simple. All right, almost going to see what's in this too. USPS losses. According to Fox News, the U.S. Postal Service reported a $9.5 billion loss in 2024, adding to the $100 billion in losses has accumulated since 2007. Power of the Sun. Commonwealth Fusion System, a startup founded by scientists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, announced on December 17th that the company will build its first fusion power plant in Virginia with the aim of generating cheap and clean electricity there in early 2030s. The proposed facility is among the first that would harness nuclear fusion, not nuclear fission, the process that powers the sun to produce electricity. Interesting there. And I noticed too there's a cold fusion. I like to get one of those, for my place. Hey, why not? Have it small and I could run power and I could tell the electric company where to go, right? And let's see here. Another one I may have missed. State Department sued. A group of Palestinians and Palestinian Americans have filed a federal lawsuit against Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, accusing him and his department for failing to implement the Leahy law that prohibits the United States from sending military aid to foreign security forces committing human rights violations. This lawsuit demands one thing and one thing only: for the State Department to obey the law requiring a ban on assistance. One moment. Abusive Israeli security forces, said Sarah Lee Winston, Executive Order for Democracy for the Arab World Now, or DAWN. Plaintiffs include a math teacher in Gaza, identified in the lawsuit with Presidium Amal, who had been forcibly displaced 7 times since October 2023. 20 of her family members have been killed by U.S.-backed Israeli attacks. I renounce all this, regardless, including October 7th, so I'm not being biased or anti-Semitic or all that beakering rhetoric people like to throw at because they can't even tie their own shoelaces, but they want to try to call you out because they don't know how to think for themselves, right? I renounce it. I'm against all foreign aid, period. If you want to donate to a country like Israel, for an example, do it on your watch, not mine. That's just my view. That's for everyone across the board. All right, let me see here. Victory for whistleblower. An ongoing legal battle between Biden Department of Justice and the Texas doctor who blew the whistle on the Texas Children's Hospital for giving kids sex-change drugs and surgeries. The wife of the doctor announced December 16th that newly released evidence proves Biden's DOJ knew the man never violated patients' privacy. According to his wife, then Texas doctor Etienne Haim was indicted in June. The DOJ's case was that he was officially assigned to another hospital at the time and allegedly had no reason to be assessing TCH medical records after being forced to acknowledge that Etienne was actually treating patients at TCH. The DOJ basically conceded that they presented false information to the grand jury. In retribution against the whistleblower, the DOJ accused Haim, of illegally accessing patients' records. Where they're at. Throw those bastards in prison, please. Scumbags. Banning puberty blockers. On December 11th, UK health regulators joined other countries in the Western world by banning puberty blockers for confused children after an expert review warned that drugs pose an unacceptable safety risk to children. So far, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, Spain, France, and most other countries in Europe have outright banned or massively curtailed the use of medications that arrest puberty in otherwise healthy children who have been led to believe that they were born in the wrong body. When he takes office next year, Donald Trump has announced he will also ban procedures like puberty blockers. Experts say this is unlikely since states have more power over regulating medical procedures than the government, which is true. 10th Amendment again. And I can say this. So people still want to indulge in the Dr. Moreau effect. There's a good book that was written in 1896 by H.G. Wells on Dr. Moreau. You get this book. I know there's movies on it. Supposed to be making it like a fourth version anytime soon. And there's audiobooks on it too. I think Library Vox has it. And it's very good. So people need to check that out. read it, examine, listen, because it's all about controlling people. And puberty blockers, in my view, too, coincides with that story. And even with like one shooter, Aubrey Hale, they call her the trans shooter in Nashville. Regardless, it was horrific. I call it an SSRI case, and it goes in the same category, in my humble opinion. So I'm gonna do one more here. Let me see. All right. Big Pharma accused of fraud. Pfizer Inc., the drug manufacturing company, manufacturing behemoth, entrusted with the public's health during the 2020 COVID pandemic. Once again, back in court. This time around, is alleged that this infamous company failed to warn patients that is injectable contraceptive drug Depo-Provera can increase the risk of developing brain tumors. That's according to a lawsuit filed in November 4th in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. Well, some more parasites would be created by this drug, allegedly speaking. Wow, it's just insanity as usual, right? Okay, well, I'm going to be reading a few pages on here, maybe a couple extra also. And for the title, of course, what is next for Syrians after Al-Assad ousted? Here's one of the pages here. Israel weaves a tangled web in Syria. This is by Nick Griffin. Brit nationalists explain how the Zionist state benefits from Islamic terrorism. What portion of AFP readers believe that 9/11 was carried out by Al-Qaeda, that it was an inside job, or was perpetrated by those dancing Israelis? Wherever you blame as instigators or collaborators, the vast majority of the U.S. news outlets have told us over and over that Al-Qaeda jihadists were involved in the Twin Towers attack. This makes any form of support for Al-Qaeda a very special sort of treachery for many Americans. So, what are we to call the fact that weapons supplied by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in airstrikes ordered by Joe Biden just rewarded Al-Qaeda jihadists by giving them Syria? Only one word suffices: treason. The U.S. deep state and its fellow criminal overseas have just destroyed a secular state that for decades held back on the tide of radicalism and protected the oldest Christian communities in the world. Villages where they still speak Amharic, the language spoken by Jesus, are now occupied by radical head choppers, literally ISIS and Al-Qaeda, albeit rebranded by the West as moderate rebels. See, all the same rhetoric recycled plus as usual, right? Like Barack Obama said about the same thing, having Gaddafi get overthrown by Al-Qaeda. Now they're the good guys. Please. Just as they have been silent about years of Ukraine shelling Russian communities in the Donbass, the mainstream media ignored the beheadings, shootings, rapes, and ethnic cleansing already being perpetrated by America's pet jihadists. The destruction of Syria is not, however, the work of America alone. Turkey and the Persian Gulf states, particularly Qatar, funded and armed the invasion of Syria by radicals from 80 different countries. In doing so, they have settled the 70-year-old struggle for the Arab soul between secular nationalism and the vision of Sayyid Qutb, called the father of Salafi jihadism. They have also revived the possibility of building a pipeline to deliver Qatari gas to the European Union via a lucrative transition hub in Turkey. Above all, the Sunni states have collaborated with Israel to deal a massive blow to their ancient Shia enemy, even though the Shia were the only ones who provided serious military support for the people of Gaza. The Israeli military has already destroyed Syria's paralyzed military and seized the rest of the Golan Heights. They have cut off Hezbollah's supply lines from Iran and made it highly likely that Lebanon will follow Syria into civil war, leaving the Israeli army unchallenged on its northern border. These apparently opportunistic actions are, in fact, aspects of a much longer-term strategy. The Yanin Plan, published in 1982, envisaged breaking up all the other countries in the region into mutually hostile ethno-religious cantons, allowing the Zionist regime to seize and settle new territories around its previous borders. The Yanin Plan is in turn only a current military aspect of even more ambitious Greater Israel project. This was the brainchild of Saev Vladimir Jabotinsky, the founder of the extreme revisionist Zionist movement and directed forerunner of the liquid regime headed by Netanyahu. Jabotinsky wanted the borders of Israel to stretch to the most creative reading of the Talmudic description of the Promised Land. The rolling land grab aims for an exclusively Jewish state, stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates and from Turkey to Saudi Arabia. The presence of hundreds of thousands of Arab Christians in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, however, is the stumbling block on this long-term goal. It is one thing to bribe U.S. politicians and bamboozle the public into supporting the dispossession of millions of Muslim Arabs, but quite another to get Americans to accept the destruction of Christianity in its very cradle. If, on the other hand, this dirtiest of work is carried out by fundamentalist Muslims, then the fact that they are armed by America and supported by U.S. and Israeli airstrikes may go unnoticed. The notorious announcement by French Rabbi David Tautou that Islam is the broom of Israel is often seen as referring only to Christian Europe, but it also applies to the land's liquid and their religious Zionist coalition partners intend to steal from their neighbors. I had direct personal insight into the mindset of the jihadist invaders of Syria in 2012 during of my 4 visits in Damascus. Our Syrian hosts took us to a prison to meet captured rebel fighters. Among them was a Palestinian. He had been a driver in a convoy of suicide bomb cars, but the car in front blew up prematurely, leaving him badly injured and unconscious when the Syrian army captured him and took him to a military hospital. Waking up to find wounds being tended, the man thought that he had been rescued by his terrorist brothers, reasoning that he was far more likely to provide useful information if he believed he was among fellow jihadists. It was decided not to correct his mistake. Before we entered his room, we were told to pose as foreign jihadi volunteers and be very careful, as he spoke some English. Thus, in one of my most bizarre experiences of my life, there I was, Ahula Akbari was a failed suicide bomber. Speaking partly in English and partly through an interpreter, my colleagues and I spent about 10 minutes talking with him. When he told us that he was Palestinian, my Italian colleague asked why he had come to fight in Syria rather than taking up arms against Israel. Because he answered the real enemy weren't the Jews, but the Murtad, allegedly apostate Muslims including the Alawites and Shia, and the Nazarenes, which is Christians. I asked him where he would like to go to wage jihad if he struggled to liberate Sham, or Syria, had already been won by the time he was able to fight again. He instantly replied, bore out his previous answer, Europe, Rome, to finish the Nazarenes. No doubt Western intelligence agencies believe that these radical Sunni scorpions can be deployed against Arabs, Iranians, Russians, and Chinese, and then put back in jars on the geographical shelf. But this is a very dangerous game. For now, the new Al-Qaeda regime in Damascus is playing along. Its figureheads pose as moderate rebels and studiously avoid complaining about Israel bombing their cities, destroying the military stockpiles they have taken up from Assad, and stealing an area twice the size of Gaza. But their European and Beltway controllers, their quartermasters, should consider this. The Zionists don't only see Islamist broom as sweeping Christianity of the Holy Land or even out of Europe. They also have a long track record of using Muslim terrorism as a stick, which to prod Jews into leaving countries in which they have lived for centuries. This was seen particularly in the 1850s, with Zionist teams posing as Islamists to bomb targets in Morocco and in Egypt, the so-called Levant affair. With the stunning victory of their Islamist proxies in Syria, the Zionists have taken a giant step toward Greater Israel. They have opened the way to extensive new northern settlements and broken the Shia coalition, which provided the only military possibility of halting their destruction of Gaza. Once that valuable piece of coastal real estate is cleansed of its surviving Palestinians, it too will urgently need new settlers. What are the Zionists going to get all those new Jews? While the ultra-Orthodox have a very high birth rate, many of them stubbornly refuse to serve in the military. Some of them even regard the establishment of the State of Israel by secular Zionists as blasphemy. The Zionists therefore look for demographic reinforcement to Jewish communities in the West, Ukraine, and Russia. Unfortunately for the project, however, they are reluctant to leave the comfort and security of the diaspora for frontline hilltop settlements in the middle of a fly-blown desert, when the security services are presumably hope that their tame Al-Qaeda allies will settle down in Syria with their new sex slaves, grateful for all the support they got from the West. In Tel Aviv, by contrast, they'll be counting on fresh examples of blowback terrorism to frighten Jews into leaving the increasingly insecure and Islamicized West and immigrating to Israel. Anyone who thinks that the end of Assad's oppression will end radical Islamic terrorism has another thing coming. Interesting there. Wow. So it goes a lot more deeper than what the mainstream news want you to know. And I did a show on this a while back on that so-called new Syrian leader, and which is nothing more than another prop, another operative that had a $10 million bounty on his head. And that person was Mohammed Al-Jolani. That was, if you want to check out that episode, which is 790 on my Podbean and other sites, you can check it out yourself. Oh, man. Just the more the Club of Rome turns, right? So I want to hit another one here. Who will rule Syria? Terrorists hold the capital, but the country is partitioned. This is by Phil Garaldi. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, in a radio broadcast in October 1939, famously said, "I cannot forecast to you the action of Russia. It is a riddle wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. But perhaps there is a key. That key is Russian national interest." Churchill was referring to the August 1939 non-aggression agreement, the so-called Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed by the foreign ministers of Germany and the Soviet Union, by which the two nations agreed not to take military action against each other for a period of 10 years. The Churchill comment came a month after the German invasion of Poland on September 1st, which led to both France and Britain declaring war on Hitler's regime. Russia remained seemingly neutral through a secret agreement with Berlin, and it soon joined Germany in invading Poland's eastern half, establishing its sphere of influence rule there. Though it took place 85 years ago, it was the most recent forceful division of an established state prior to this month's invasion and apparent partitioning of Syria by Israel, the U.S., Turkey, and an Islamic insurgency supported and trained by America. In that light, Churchill's comment could equally be applied to the recent destruction of Syria with the question of cui bono, that is, who benefits, coming immediately to mind as one wonders that comes next and more to the point. Or what is driving the process, whose national interest compelled the regime change and partitioned the country, or what is a process that developed spontaneously. But dividing up an existing nation was an end of the story back in 1939. Just there is no end in sight today for what was once Syria. By the end of 1940, Hitler issued a Führer Directive 21 in order for Germany's planned invasion of the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa, after the nickname of the powerful medieval Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I. The objective was acquired to open the vast Soviet farmlands, most particularly the Ukraine, to German immigration, the so-called quest of Lebensraum, or living space for the growing German population. On June 22nd, 1941, more than 3 million German and Allied Axis troops invaded the Soviet Union along an 1,800-mile-long front, beginning the bloody slaughter that ended in May 1945 with the total defeat of Hitler's Germany. With that bit of history to guide one, it is interesting to contemplate what model Syria's new rulers might follow, given the lessons that might have been learned from World War II. The easy suggestion of the interest group that has the most at stake in Syria is the new government itself, which is seated somewhat tenuously in Damascus. To be sure, no country is a monolith, and many Syrians are celebrating the fall of an immediately repressive, authoritarian, and corrupt Bashar al-Assad government. Other Syrians, particularly from hitherto protected minority groups like Christians, Alawites, and Shiites, are now living in fear or fleeing from the violent sectarian insurgents that have taken the place of al-Assad. Christian churches have been looted and desecrated and warned not to hold Christmas services, not to hold Christmas parades, and not even display images of St. Nicholas. This was, the mainstream media told us, was the new inclusive government in Syria. According to one other ominous report, it appears that Sharia law has already been announced by the new Justice Minister, Shadi Al-Awasi. If I get tongue-tied, I'm sorry. To be sure, fearing what is to come is legitimate as the rebel leader of the Al-Qaeda-derived Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS terror group, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who now goes by his name as Ahmad al-Shara, is a founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria, al-Nusra, and a former deputy to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The U.S. Department listed him as an HTS as a terrorist as well, and placed his $10 million bounty on al-Jolani's head, which presumably will soon be removed by Joe Biden. There's plenty of blood on al-Jolani's hand and little in the way of evidence that he will not opt out to slaughter those who see as his enemies. Much of the killing being guided by the extreme religious groups that make up his followers. Indeed, there are already reports of group killings, including numerous soldiers in the Syrian Arab army who surrendered rather than fight the insurgents. Al-Jolani now claims that this extremism was just a phase, and he has several times confirmed that he wants good relations with Israel, even suggesting that Israeli support enabled his warriors to move quickly from their bases to Damascus. But al-Jolani has never actually apologized for or disowned the atrocities committed on his watch from 2011 to 2013 when he was actively killing fellow Syrians. This includes August 2013 massacres in some of the Alawite areas of Latakia, which included the systematic act of killing entire families. In an international investigation later determined, one veteran correspondent also reported that insurgents were devoted to sectarian mass murder in the areas they control. The question is, how soon will the atrocities begin? The same global compassion for Syrians who suffered under Al-Assad should also extend to those Syrians now fearing the new atrocities. But the governments that have brought about the downfall of the Assad regime appear to have little sympathy for those who will bear the next round of suffering. So, to return to the question of who gains beyond al-Jolani and his associates, one has to consider Israel and Turkey as winners, both of whom appear ready to establish permanent occupation of large chunks of Syria to the south and to the north. Israel is calling a buffer or security zone and has ensured that its presence will not be contested by carrying out hundreds of airstrikes that have prevented the new government in Damascus from inheriting the old government considerable arsenal. The Israeli military said it targeted Syrian anti-craft batteries, missile despots, manufacturing facilities, drones, helicopters, fighter jets, tanks, hangars, radar installations, and 15 naval vessels, and more than 480 airstrikes, leaving Israel as the only significant armed power within its zone of influence. It also reported that Israeli army units are moving to Damascus, to the capital, where it will have to come to some arrangement with HTS and al-Jolani. Turkey will be able to take control of the areas that it desires in the north because it has large, well-trained and equipped troops concentrations right along the border. In short, there is no contest what is happening. So, what is in it for the United States? Nothing but a Kirk thank you from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who clearly is convinced with Biden's special envoy Amos Hochstein, an Israeli by birth, to set the ball rolling towards Syria through Adriat use of an attacking on southern Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, followed by a phony ceasefire that empowered Israel to invade and overthrow its neighbors, Syria. I'm sorry about that. It was as all part of the plan by the U.S. and Israel to reshape the Middle East to benefit the Jewish state. And Biden took credit for it in his usual haphazard way, claiming after regime change, the Assad's main allies, Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia, are far weaker today than they were when I took office. Their inability to save Assad was a direct result of the blows that Ukraine and Israel have delivered in their own self-defense with unflagging support of the United States. Sure, Joe, at the end of the day, the U.S. spent billions of dollars arming an insurgency that they knew was dominated by Al-Qaeda in a government replacement scheme that benefited only Israel and Turkey, and which targeted a country that in no way threatened the United States. This was all accomplished by U.S. military that had occupied a large swath of northern Syria, stealing its oil and wheat. The U.S. also pressured that Al-Assad regime by imposing crippling economic sanctions that, as Trump-Biden officials boasted, crushed Syria's economy, denied reconstruction, and exacerbated fuel and food shortages for everyday Syrians, all of which decreased support from the country's government. The objective was to cause enough misery among Syrians to have the public lose confidence in the government and bring about an implosion. This was what finally happened earlier in December. One flawed authoritarian system collapsed, while another one will likely be even worse has succeeded it together with three parasite nations, Israel, Turkey, and the United States, illegally occupying large parts of what was once a single nation. Was it worth it? It will be very interesting to see what the incoming Donald Trump team makes of the mess that Biden has left behind in the Middle East and Ukraine. Oh, yes. So, insane indeed, right? Insane indeed. It is so chilling for sure. Chilling for sure. But I'm going to read something right here by Kevin Barrett, PhD, Greater Israel Metastasizing. This is what Israel claims. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, God makes a promise. To your descendants, I have given this land from the river of Egypt as far as the great river of Euphrates. In Genesis 17:8, God reiterates the promise to Abraham, the whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you. This is the totality of the claim that the Israelis have on what is referred to by Zionists as Greater Israel. But even the scripture admits the Jews lived there as foreigners. And what about the Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese? Interesting there. So remember, too, that Jerusalem fell in 70 CE or AD due to their corruption. So let's see what Mr. Bear has to say about this. Israel is a cancer on the Middle East. Resistance leaders across the region have used that metaphor for generations. The Zionists who dominate American politics, finance, and media have attacked it as inappropriate. But is the metaphor inaccurate? Cancer occurs when a diseased cell or cells begin uncontrollably expanding at the expense of a neighboring cell and organ systems. Israel, a malignant body of extremist fanatics implanted into the heart of the Middle East keep mindlessly and voraciously expanding, not unlike a violent tumor. Such pathological Zionist growth has caused untold pain, suffering, and hardship for the people of Palestine and the region and the world. Let's chart Israel's malignant growth. The original version of modern Israel, as set forth in the Balfour Declaration in 1917, consisted of a mere Jewish homeland, not a state, guaranteed not to impinge to the rights of non-Jews who constitute the vast majority of the population and who own virtually all of the land of historic Palestine. After invading, Jewish terrorists began running amok, recounted as Thomas Ward's magisterial state of terror, how terrorism created modern Israel. Britain rewarded them with the 1937 Peel Commission partition plan, which would have created Israel of 33 Palestinians of Palestine, leaving the other 67% for Palestinians. The Peel Commission plan was outright theft. Palestinians owned well over 90% of the land in Palestine, yet the Commission wanted to steal almost one-third of their land and hand it to the Eastern European Jewish terrorist invaders. But even such grand larceny wasn't enough for the Zionists. They held out for more and got it in 1948 by bribing President Harry Truman in a suitcase containing $2 million in cash, as recounted by JFK to Gore Vidal. That bribe and other like it produced the UN partition plan, which almost doubled the size of the Peel Commission's Israel. But even that outrageous robbery did not satisfy the Zionist terrorists, who immediately began massacring Palestinians and invading territory outside their UN borders when the Nakba, Palestinian Holocaust, was over, until thousands of Palestinians were dead. More than 750,000 survivors have been robbed of their land and property, forced into exile as permanent refugees. As perpetrated in the 1948 Holocaust, the Zionists refused to return to their UN-approved borders, which would have given them more than 55% of Palestine, instead of continue occupying almost 80%. But even that didn't satisfy them. The Zionist leadership spent next 2 decades plotting that would become the 1967 War of Aggression, in which they stole another 77,000 square kilometers consisting of the West Bank, including Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. Together, those stolen territories are almost 4 times the size of the pre-1967 Israel. After 1967, Zionist leaders split between those willing to return stolen territory in return for peace and those dedicated to endless wars of expansion, while the assassination of the Land for Peace Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995, the issue was definitely settled in the favor of Forever War's party. I remember that too, when Rabin did that. Rabin was animally a mere speed bump on the road to greater Israel. The Zionist leadership has always tactically agreed that Israel will keep expanding to its biblical mandate and beyond. David Ben-Gurion defined Zionism as a goal to create a Jewish state in the whole of the land of Israel. That whole includes Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, and part of Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and northern Arabia, and arguably Turkey. Such conquest will require genocidal war against those countries and people. 2024 will go down in history as the year the Zionist cancer metastasized, sending its toxic tendril even further into northern Gaza, the West Bank, southern Lebanon, and Syria. Netanyahu's minister Smotrich is calling for the full annexation of the West Bank and Gaza and the murder or expulsion of all Palestinians from historic Palestine. That process is already underway as northern Gaza is being emptied and Israel has grabbed a full 6,000 acres of the West Bank. Meanwhile, Israel is violating a ceasefire agreement with Lebanon in an attempt to steal all of South Lebanon up to the Litani River. And in the wake of the U.S.-Turkish-Israeli overthrow of the Syrian government, Israel has massively attacked Syria and grabbed vast swaths of Syrian land. The ever-expanding cancer of Zionism poses a clear and present danger to the region and the world. The driving force behind Zionism is a virulent version of Jewish Messianic Mennorism, whose endgame is a Jewish military leader conquering not just the region, but the whole world and establishing a Jewish global dictatorship in the occupied Jerusalem. First, they came for Palestinians. Israel's neighbors are next, but this isn't a regional problem. Metastasizing Israel threatens people across the globe. Well, you can say the words synagogue of Satan, right, is relevant today from Revelations chapter 2 and 3, verse 9. So I'm saying that chapter 2, verse 9 and chapter 3, verse 9, just to clarify. We always got to look at everything who benefits. I see this as a part of the one world order. What's going on in Syria does coincide with, in my honest view, the Club of Rome, Seventh Kingdom. I talked about that in a couple episodes, which I did, what I said aforementioned. Dangerous times indeed. Destroying heritage is one of the keys of a one world government. And the Greater Israel Project is part of that, based on this article. What we're seeing in Syria and beyond could spread like fire. And I'm not going to go after Jews as a whole because that is irrelevant. You got parasites everywhere you go, and what's happening here is just a deserving example. When people ask me about what Netanyahu, it's like, hey, remember the whole COVID lockdown? He locked down his whole jurisdiction, including doing inoculations by force, unconscripted, or he won't get their benefits. If you call him a conservative, you can grow palm trees in Alaska. Let that sink in. This is why individuals like ourselves have to renounce this. Don't be afraid. You won't be called anti-Semitic. They'll try, but it won't stick. It's being whitewashed like everything else. Even the Marxists don't like the Marxists. They say whatever they want. They can use that rhetoric. It don't matter. It's void and without force. And of course, even Ron Paul did talk about we need to stay out of it. I know it's getting a little bit too long here. And I do apologize. This one's pretty brief. Uncle Sam needs to keep his nose out of Syrian affairs. My first reaction to news earlier this month that the Syrian government had been overthrown and how much did the U.S. have to do with it? How involved was the CIA and how much is it going to cost? With the Saddam and Gaddafi before him, we knew that Assad was no libertarian hero, but unleash an army dedicated to establishing an Islamic State in once secular Syria hardly seems like a good idea to me. As with President George W. Bush's mission accomplished moment after Saddam's overthrow, getting rid of Assad will prove to be the easy part. Rebuilding Syrian society after the destruction of the country will cost billions and likely be about as successful as our liberation of Libya, which is still a failed terrorist-dominated state more than a decade later. In 2017, the Los Angeles Times published an article that sadly speaks volumes about insanity of our interventionist foreign policy in Syria. Militants armed by the Pentagon fight those armed by the CIA, read the headline. How does it make any sense that the Pentagon is fighting a proxy war with the CIA on Syrian soil? What's worse is that the American people are forced to pay for this Pentagon versus CIA war and then forced to pay again to rebuild the country after all the destruction. The Syrian people will feel the cost in more than just dollars. How involved is the U.S. government in the overthrow of the Syrian government? For the past 10 years, the U.S. has controlled the areas of Syrian oil and wheat production, stealing resources we have no legal claim on. The combination of resource theft and extreme sanctions hollowed at the Syrian society over the past 10 years. So when the terrorists sprang forth from Idlib a few weeks ago, there was little resistance. Now, instead of the relatively benign yet authoritarian rule of Assad, we have ruled by the direct inheritors of the people who blamed for the attacks for attacking us on 9/11. I am shocked that the mainstream media and many posts, if not most politicians, are cheering this. Ironically, some of the biggest cheerleaders for the Al-Qaeda takeover of Syria are the same members of Congress who finished their daily speeches on the House floor with, "We will never forget 9/11. I guess they finally forgot. The implosion of Syria will, like the U.S. engineered implosion of Libya and Iraq, has not led to democracy, peace, and the protection of civil liberties. In each case, it has produced the exact opposite. Millions dead, millions more living in misery, with many seeking revenge against those who destroy their families, their lifestyle, and their countries. Are we safer having created millions of new enemies? President-elect Donald Trump made a statement last week about Syria, saying that it is not our fight, and we should have nothing to do with it. His sentiment is a correct one, though we have unfortunately, to this point, had far too much to do with it. Let us hope that, as president, Trump will follow through with this sentiment and extract the United States to overt and covert presence from not only for Syria, but the entire Middle East. This is not our fight, and every single thing we have done there for the past 75 years or so years has only made things worse. Time for an America First foreign policy. Yep, the one they say he wore tinfoil hats. Prove him, please. Will you refute his statement? Yeah, he is absolutely correct. We got to end foreign entanglements, end foreign aid, and get rid and anyone that's considered foreign agents, put them on that list. If they get offended, who the hell cares? One thing for sure, folks. It has to be done. Hopefully, we all start petitioning. No more foreign entanglements. Let everyone know. I don't care what party they're in. You gotta let your voice be heard. Even do it on the state and local level. And do resolutions. It's time to renounce foreign entanglements completely. Well, that will be it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or recommendations, whatever you do, please use decorum. You can go to via email, ll3-podcast@proton.me. I will leave the link of AmericanFreePress.net, and I'll put the titles in there. But if you want to read it as a whole, it's got to be subscription only. If you want to donate, go to paypal.me or cash.app/localnumber3, and don't forget Steemit at LL3-Podcast. I apologize for not saying it in the beginning. If you want to subscribe or donate to American Free Press, please do it. I like their work. Plus, always observe responsibly. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. May your guardian spirits be with you. And hopefully everyone has a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Winter Solstice. Take care.